everybody. I'm Maria Evans. I'm the Artistic Director here for the Arts Council of Princeton. And I'm doing what I always do, and that is to go into our Taplin gallery and check out what's new. And as you can see behind me, we have a gorgeous show in our gallery. And that's what brings you here tonight, and that's what we're going to talk about. These two artists, Léni Paquet-Morante and Susan DeConcini, proposals for our gallery committee independently, but our gallery committee saw their work and thought these two are a natural together because of not only their palettes, but their love of water, which is, this show is called Textured Waters. And it's been funny because we paired them together probably over a year ago. And since that time, Susan and Léni, who are relatively newcomers to the Arts Council, both have participated in our In Conversation series, which you can catch on our YouTube channel. They were both interviewed by Tim Andrews, and then they were both featured in the chalets, which were up over the holiday this past year out on various locations in downtown Princeton. And so their paths keep crossing, and I think they kind of cross for a reason. And here they are together in our gallery. And as you can see behind me, this is the work of Susan DeConcini, and they've both been excellent to work with, and I'm really enjoying getting to know them even better. So you're going to find out about the work tonight, find out about the artists, and please post any chats you might have so that we can address all questions. But I think without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Susan, and then we'll hear from Léni, and we'll hear from them together as well. So thank you for tuning in.
Hi, I'm Susan, and this is Léni, and we just wanted to talk a little bit about the show and our experience working together and how much fun it's been. So, hi Léni.
Susan. This has been so much fun getting to know you and putting the show together and working with Maria. I'm really delighted to be here tonight with you. And we're gonna, as you said, we're gonna be introducing our work to our audience. And also, I'm looking forward to later on, the two of us talking together and sharing some thoughts of what we've learned actually a little bit from each other during this process as well. And we're going to be opening up to some chats and some Q&A from our audience, which can be done at any time during this process as well. So I'm encouraging everybody to participate, and I'm looking forward to what you have to say now, Susan. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Sounds great. So just to introduce myself a little bit, I am Susan. I primarily usually work as a scenic artist for McCarter Theater, but theater isn't really a thing that's happening right now. So in light of this pandemic, it's actually very interesting because I've always had some sort of a studio space, but recently this past year, it's felt like a safe space. Does that make sense? Like it's a place that I go to find calm and things like that. So in all honesty, with exception for this piece right here, all the other pieces in this show by me have all been done during the pandemic. So yeah, I just wanted to put that out there. Now, something that's really nice for me about watercolors, which is all of them are watercolors, is that there is something I hear from so many people about, oh my gosh, you do watercolor, it seems so hard. I always make mistakes. And for me, that's part of the joy of watercolors, is that they are a little bit performative. Like you have to make sure that your brushstroke is right. And if you make a mistake, you have to integrate it into the final piece or you abandon it. So there's something about there where I have to focus so much on the piece that it's kind of, it clears your mind from all stresses of pandemic and quarantine life. So this, painting all these, painting the water was good for my soul, as well as just a fun, beautiful expression of my creativity. So I'm gonna have a few things to say about a couple pieces here and there. So one thing I wanna talk about this piece here is that, so you may notice that my pieces tend to be a little more saturated, and they use the full range of lights and darks. That's just my personal choice. I like things in bright colors. So that's it. Consistently throughout all of my pieces, you will see that is kind of how I approach things. So like I said before, this guy here is my earliest piece in the show. And while I do really like it, I also can see in it that how much I have developed in the painting of water. I also want to say that in almost all paintings except for one, I have used no white gouache, which if you're not familiar with gouache, it is like a white pigmented, it's a kind of watercolor, but it's opaque. So there is no white paint in any of the pieces. They're all the white that you see is the paper, and I will show you which one has it. So this piece here is a little bit larger. It was one of the first pieces that I did in this thing. Get some reflection, but that's okay. But it's also a good time to talk about how I work. I work counter to a lot of watercolor artists. I actually work from dark to light. So I like to put in all my shadows first so that they define the waves, and then I can get a little more improvisational afterwards. So all of the dark things were the first ones that I put in. Now this guy is very recent. This is called With the Tide. I probably should include names, shouldn't I? In this painting is a really good demonstration of how I was able to learn how to use a scrubber brush, which basically you can use masking fluid, almost like a stencil, and it protects the white of the paper, but when you pull it up, it's a harsh line. So this is really a good showcase of the scrubber brush technique. And another time to point out that there is no white paint at all. And I also do like to frame. Yes.
Hi, Susan. We have a question from Mary asking, do you work from photographs?
Yes. At this point in my water journey, I do use a research photo. My end goal is the elusive thing about water is that it is constantly changing. Like a wave is constantly moving. So for me to understand the structure of a wave, I need to freeze it. I need to pause it. So I do use photo reference. Now, a lot of these are actually, I like to use public domain or Creative Commons photos. And there are a couple of, they actually are surfers that I follow specifically so that I know where my images are coming from and I can give them some compensation even though it's not necessary. But there are a few pieces that are photos that I have taken myself. So yes, I do use photo reference. Thank you for questions. Keep them coming. This is a piece, I'm trying to see if I can get this piece sometimes gets lost because it's very calm and beautiful, but make sure you pay attention to it because it's, I don't know, I find it really calm and soothing. Now, this is one of my larger pieces. These two pieces are currently the largest pieces that I've ever attempted in watercolor. And most people do not work this large when they work in watercolor. So this one was my first experiment, and it was a safe one to try this large in my book. You can also see I go from the lightest white all the way down to the darkest of darks. And this is actually a very good painting to help you understand my process in the way that I put in all the darks. And then from that, it makes it easy for me to shape them later on. And if you do want to see how they work, I do put a lot of time lapses on Instagram, so you can see some of my process as it's going on. So make sure you look at those. In here also is a good example of clouds that I do. Ooh, I just saw it pop up. I'm paying better attention now. So these two paintings, the actual paintings themselves, are 28 by 44 inches, and the frames are 43 by 61. So they are basically, I have a desk at home that I paint on, and that is how big of a painting. This is as big of a painting as I can do now on the surface, the desk that I have. So, and I'm not sure anybody wants anything larger than this on their walls, in all honesty. So if you do, please contact me. I can make it happen, but I'm not doing it if I don't have to.
Hey, Sue. We've got a question from Lisa asking, how many little samples did you paint before going that big?
Of water? Oh, goodness. Well, I've only started painting water about 2 years ago, and I've probably painted, I would say, at least 60 or 70 smaller paintings. And I am including some of these guys as smaller. None of my small pieces made it into the show because big walls want big statements.
There's a clarification, Sue. Lisa is asking about how many samples, I suppose, maybe of color and, you know, the rendering of the paint. She said, how many little samples did you do for that painting, before doing that painting, I think is what her intention was.
Oh, like if I did smaller
Right.
versions of it? I didn't. I jumped in. I just jumped right in. Well, in theater, I tend to, I paint giant backdrops, things that are walls bigger than this wall. So you don't get a lot of time to practice. So I do tend to jump right in. But yeah, so this piece, let me try and get a better angle on the color for this. This is another one of the big ones. Once again, just jumped right in. But yeah. I just love this piece, and it's a lot more technically difficult than this piece because it's, once again, there is no white paint. All the white that you see is the paper. So it takes a lot of planning to do the seafoam ones, which is why I love them so much, because they're so challenging. But when you do a painting this large, it is a bit more of a gamble. But at the same time, I am still using just watercolor and paper. So I feel like I can experiment really well without like, oh, I've now wasted hundreds of dollars. So, you know. All right, this guy is a bit of an experiment for me because it's the first time I've worked on really shallow waters with reflections in them. So this one had some very interesting currents going on, and yeah, it was really exciting. Another thing I want to mention about paintings like this is you'll notice if there are stones and things like that in my paintings, they don't get as developed as the water, partially just because I just want to paint water and I'm not interested in painting rocks. So they will sometimes be less realized than the water is, just because. So here's some two smaller guys. Oh, here's the piece that I was talking about that has some of the gouache in it. If you follow Instagram or other things, you'll be able to see a better detail of it. But I took a Q-tip and dotted on some of the sparkles. And yeah. So, and just something to mention about people in general, any kind of art or drawing that you do, is that it's important to trust your eyes and not what your brain thinks of something. There's actually some really odd purples in this painting. And if I had just done what my brain said, it would have come out very different. But instead I looked at my image and really went for the purple, and it looks really, really, it turned out really nicely. Now my last piece in the show here is here.
Hey, Sue,
Hey.
I'm going to pop in. We've got another question for you.
While you're ready to come in.
Yeah. So this one, it's an anonymous attendee, but it's a good question. And that is, how has scene design informed your paintings, and how has painting informed your scene design?
So that's a good question. Theater painting, my scenic painting and scenic design, I actually had an emphasis in scenic design in college. I think it has to do, a lot of it I would say is the speed at which I paint. I paint pretty rapidly. I'm always about the shortcuts to what are the least amount of steps that I can do to make the most successful piece. So I've never been good at the meticulous, like things that take a long time to do. I would rather paint 30 paintings in the span of a couple months than just really take care of one. That's just my style. And I can really see when other people put that time in, how amazing it is. But I would say that in theater, you got to get it done. And so that is something that I really have figured out. There's also, in theater, there's a certain amount of like, you step back and look at things. You can't get too insane about the details because it's about what it looks like from a step back. Now in theater, that's 15 feet. In someone's life, it's, 5 feet or 6 feet or that kind of a thing. So with paintings like this, it needs to make sense here, but also at a distance. So being able to take a picture of it and see what's wrong, fixing the problem. I'm very good at, in theater, we get good at saying something's wrong here. How do I make it right? So I would say that those are things that I've pulled from my theater painting. I'm just gonna chat about this little guy real quick, which if you do end up looking at it.
Hey, Sue.
Yeah.
There's a question from Dawn, and I love that everyone's sending in these questions. It's really great, and we're going to have a time when we're both on the screen at the same time for like a discourse. But I like to feed these to you as you're going, because then we can have these pieces behind you as reference. So Dawn is asking, how long did it take you to paint larger pieces? Do you work on multiple pieces simultaneously or only one piece at a time?
I do work on pieces simultaneously. I do find that if I have nothing on any surface, I will procrastinate. It's really good for me to always have something that's in a process. I always want something to be in the middle. And when pieces get to a more finalized point, then I might pull away from this piece and start focusing on this piece. But I do like to keep multiples going at the same time. I'm also not great at sitting still. So when one piece is drying for the next step, I can be working on something else. Now the large pieces, I break them down. I have a bullet journal and I break down how much time I spend on them, but I feel like for me with brush in hand in the 20, no. It depends on the painting, honestly. The orangier one took, I feel like, I would say a week of in the studio. Now, I don't always spend 7 days in a row, and it doesn't mean that I'm spending every minute of every day on the painting. But I would say that me being in the studio, working on it with touching it, about a week. Now the green one, maybe 8 days, but let me reiterate, it's not me sitting at the desk for 8 days straight painting. There's a lot of downtime. A lot of times I do one big wash that takes maybe 3 minutes, and then I have to sit and wait and let it dry. So, yeah. Cool. Oh, I got one more question. I will address it while Léni comes and gets ready for her thing. What brand of paint do I use? Now, unlike other people, I I like to use liquid watercolors. There is a brand that I love. It's called Dr. P.H. Martin's liquid watercolors, and I like the Hydrus, not the Radiant, if that means anything to anyone. Now they come in jars like ink bottles, and they have eyedroppers. And I like them because they're already liquid, but they're at the most saturated that they can be. So I am known to make recipes. So if I do a large piece, I don't have to mix a ton and waste it. I know that it's 4 drops of ultramarine plus 2 drops of Payne's plus 1 drop of magenta. And I have swatch cards that are all above my desk. So that's how I do. I also use aqua pens, which are pens that have water in them. It's a little bit easier than trying to keep my water clean because I'm not always great at that. But I'm actually going to turn it over to Léni because her stuff is so beautiful.
And I want to give it one last
Yes.
pan of your.
There's lots of video on both of our Instagrams and things like that. And now you'll be able to peruse it here.
Hey there, everybody. Here we are in the Taplin Gallery. Thank you, Sue. That was really informative. Again, I've heard some of this before from you, and it's been interesting to talk to Sue about materials she uses, especially about watercolor, because although I paint primarily in acrylic, over 2020 I did do a bit of a shallow dive into using ink, and as a watercolory sort of material, it has crept now into my acrylic paintings. Not so much into the work that I have here in the Taplin Gallery. These are all plein air pieces. And that's where Susan's and my work diverges quite a bit. She's not working on plein air for the pieces in this show. And although I work primarily in the studio doing sort of invented work now, I do still go out into our natural landscape here in Mercer County, and also in usual times when travel is allowed, I'll travel afar. But the work in the gallery today is plein air work that I've done in Canada, all since 2019, in Canada, in Cape Cod, locally here in New Jersey, and often just by the side of the road, places that we all go by without thinking too much about them. And then also there's a piece, and well, I'm just doing a pan right now. It's a piece I did in Maryland last fall at the Potomac River, which was the grand river of my teenage years. And I also do plein air work at the Grounds for Sculpture, which is where the building that houses my studio is located. And I'll often go out to the lotus ponds there, and I've included one of those paintings in this show. So what I'll do now is hope that Sue will feed me questions from all of your input as we go. Thank you so much, Sue. We've proven to be a good team in putting this show up. In fact, I'll point out to you that this little painting of hers here became a beautiful little segue to my rocks here. So I appreciated that, although it was a bit of a last minute placement, it made a lot of sense. So what we're looking at here, I'll just take one painting at a time, take a cue from Sue, whose background in theater I think helped inform her how to present this. So I'm on a learning curve for lots of other things as well, including that my glasses are crooked, so I fixed that now. So here we are in the Bay of Fundy. I had the good fortune to be hosted I was hosted by a friend who put me up and kept me fed and traveled around with me to show me some interesting places. And this is on the Bay of Fundy. It was at Greens Point Light, so there's actually a lighthouse, which is where I'm standing as I'm doing this painting, looking down onto a scene, which is a scene, which was a place I had gone to several months earlier. So I went to the Bay of Fundy twice in 2019. The first time I went there, I was actually standing behind these rocks, looking out towards the larger bay, and I did a painting that focused on this tidal, what seemed to be like a tidal pool from another perspective. And in this case, I'm looking down at high tide at the way the seaweed was being caught up by the tide and the currents there. This is called seaweed eddy, and it was August. And so in those northern climates, the seaweed turns colors the way we're used to leaves turning colors here. And so that captured my imagination. You have a question for me, Sue?
I do have a question. The question is, do you do underpaintings?
No, it's the only underpainting I'll do, and it's not all the time. I'll throw down a color, and it's really just a starting point. It's not even so important to me what that color is, and that's sort of against the sort of plein air tradition. I think traditionally we're taught plein air, you throw down a sort of a raw sienna color, and you let some of that tone come through. And certainly I let a lot of tone come through my paintings, but I'll often put down sort of a bluish gray background, or a very deep ruddy orange. Sometimes it's a green. And honestly, when I travel to do plein air, I'll have a bunch of different canvases in my car, from small ones to large ones. The largest I do plein air is 3 foot by 3 foot. And so I travel with lots of different size canvases, and some of them just raw white canvas and some of them prepared with a ground, just so that where I'm going can tell me what it needs. And I've got some choices there, not just in my paint kit, but in my substrates, but it's generally on canvas. Thank you.
You have a second question too, which is you kind of half answered it, but being inspired by being in nature, what are also the advantages of painting on site plein air?
Well, for me, it's a physical energy thing. The work that I do in the studio tends to be more abstract and far more conceptual in a way, in sort of the planning for it, and in scale. It's a larger scale. It's got sort of another intent that's tied in to the sculpture work that I do, and sort of just a more conceptual practice. But I go out into the world to build and confirm this sort of visual library that I take notes from nature and then rely on that as I'm building my more abstract work. And speaking of which, I just had a show at Mercer County Community College here in Mercer County, and that was called Puddle Architecture. And you can see that virtual tour, and also a couple of short documentary films about that show if you're interested. And that's on their Mercer County Community College website still. Thank you for that question. But really going out into nature allows me sort of a more spontaneous reaction and participation with my paint and with the scene. And it's sort of a really fun way to gather up that fodder for further work. I'm going to keep going here. So we're going to travel from the Bay of Fundy to a local scene here in Hamilton, New Jersey, the Abbott Marshland, which is a place that I go to regularly all year round. And so it's spring here now, but it wasn't too long ago that we had a bunch of snow on the ground. And so I'm thinking it was like 5 weeks ago that I was standing in about 18 inches of slushy snow on the edge of the Abbott Marshland in Hamilton. And in this case, I knew that it was frozen over, and I knew that I was really interested in capturing some thin ice. Metaphorically, I like what thin ice connotes for the way we move ourselves around through the world. And so I like to find these little moments in landscape and in the flux and flow of natural elements. So it's not so much, it's not only about capturing that in paint, but also informing the rest of what I do as metaphors for our own human existence. So this was very thin ice and on a warm day, and that ice, those borders were changing rapidly. So it was a really fun exercise over about 4 hours time. And I do get that question, so I've just answered it. It's about 4 hours of time that I generally spend doing a painting outside. And I like to think that as I approach my subject, I've gotten pretty versatile at knowing, what size canvas to pick, and, to capture the energy that is now not so much coming out of my hands through my wrist or my fingers, but coming out through my hips and my shoulders and my back. And, a bit of a dance, I generally need a good 30, 50 feet of space to go in and out from my canvas as I'm approaching it and the scene. So this was really fun to paint. I generally get a lot of people stopping by, talking to me about what I'm doing, because we do have a lot of plein air painters in Hamilton, but we're an elusive lot. So let me keep going. We're back to Canada and the shoreline, but a different part of the peninsula that I was on. So in this case, I was standing on a beach that was composed of something that it's a rock, really. It's a solidified sandy rock they call red ledge. And so when the tide is out, you have 20 minutes of walking out onto this red rock with its little pools and heaved forms. It looks for all the world like Sedona or something, except that there's water everywhere rather than being an arid climate. So I was walking out on that beach and I found this little tiny tide pool. It's not much bigger than what would fit my fist. But the tide had gone out and left this little pool of water. So it was like a funnel. It was maybe 10 inches deep. And perhaps it was started by a pebble just worming its way down. But it held the water and the rest, for a few hours while I did the painting. And then I moved on. But it's, in this case, I was standing looking out over the Passamaquoddy Bay at Maine. And so I have other paintings that I've done from those two trips where you actually see a spit of land in the distance. And it's something I do regularly. So I have a horizon line, but it's a very thin one and not much sky. People have told me they don't see much sky in my paintings. And I hadn't thought about that, but it's definitely true. What's our question, Sue?
The question is clarification on what plein air means for people who might not understand.
It's a good question. It's traditionally it's used by painters and other people speaking about art to describe the act of taking your paint and your canvas out into the world and making a painting out in the open air. So that's what it is. It's about painting out in the open air. So it's the way traditionally landscape artists have worked, unless they're making much larger canvases from studies, which is something that I do as well. So if you go to a major museum and you see a painting that's 10 feet wide and 5 feet tall, that's generally not a plein air painting. Most of the time you are talking about much smaller canvases, 8 by 10 and around that size. It's fairly untraditional to be working 3 foot square. But that's what my energy wants to be. And these paintings are as much about my mark making with the brushes and making a certain kind of surface to describe that place. And these aren't intended to be a portrait of a place, which is really what traditionally a plein air painter is trying to do. Really evoke a feeling about a place, but they're more interested in a portrait of a place, I believe. And contemporary plein air painters may increasingly be doing more like what I'm doing. I'm not so tuned into what traditional painters are doing anymore. But anyway, I'm still part of it. And so I really, I encourage those questions and I encourage myself to be inquisitive about it as well. So we're going to move on to Cape Cod. We're traveling all over. Pre-COVID, I was a traveler. So this is a painting I did in Cape Cod, standing up on the dunes, just off of the Great Island Trail. I was hosted by a family member who had a vacation home there. And I did, on the first day, I did a somewhat more traditional plein air painting. It was 12 by 24, which is now in a collection in California. But on the third and fourth days, I actually went down into the dunes, stood up there with my easel and knocked out a couple of paintings, including this one. And then after that work, I went back to the studio and I placed them behind me, and I did more contemporary and interpretive work of the whole place that spoke more to the forces that had captured my attention. Specifically, there I was on these dunes painting away, and by the time I was ready to leave and go back and carry everything with me, the tide, which had actually been on both sides of that spit of land, the tide had come in. And so on one side, there's a salt marsh, and on the other, the larger bay. It's not open ocean really, but a pretty big bay area. And so the interpretive piece I did became called High Tide Pressing the Great Island Trail, and it was about that force.
We have someone who wants you to move it a little bit better so they can see more of the painting while you're talking.
Okay. Is that better? I hope you can see that. Back a bit. Okay. So in this painting, you know, it's called Grass Edge Dune Slip Face. And so I hadn't known, because I didn't grow up at the shoreline, I didn't know that these scooped out dunes where water and wind had eroded it like you had taken a big scoop of ice cream out of it. That's called the slip face. And the rhythms on it, sort of these tracks as the sand was falling down the face by gravity from forces and things like that, it just captured my attention, and it seemed to beg to be described as just brushstroke. And so I did that. You know, I could have rendered it more smoothly to describe sort of a softer, scoopy form, but that wasn't what I wanted to do.
So you do have someone who has said, your brushstrokes definitely speak to force, which is interesting that you just said that as well. That they're, and re-saying that your paintings are a lot more gestural than a normal plein air, and how delightful that is. There's also something from Scott Whitman, who I assume that you know, because he says hi. And he says, how do you decide on the locations? Do the titles next to the canvases reveal where the locations are, or is it important the viewer knows where they are? Or is it more about the viewer taking in the landscape as you present it?
So thank you for that question, Scott. Scott's somebody that I knew when we were at Mason Gross School of Art together long ago, and we've reconnected recently. The question about titles is an important one, because I actually use my titles sort of like the title of a recipe. So I forgot to tell you that this one is actually called Tidal Pool Red Ledge, so that anyone who's not really quite certain what drew my interest might be given a bit of a clue to dissect and understand the motivations. It also ties them all together thematically, so that if all you saw were titles, you might get, again, a clue to what was interesting to me. This one, by the way, is called Abbott Marshland Fall. And so if someone was to look at this and maybe be more intrigued in the brushwork and then be curious about the location, the title will tell you where it is. I'm not, like I said, I'm not interested in doing a portrait of a place, but if I am doing paintings of places, I will refer to them somehow. At the top of the stair, there's a little tiny painting, 14 inches square, that I did also up in Cape Cod. So I'm not going to traipse up there. Maybe some of you who are viewing this today can come see these pieces in person. So I'm going to turn around now and show you another painting that I did just recently when we got that snow. And I will say, let's see, the lighting isn't quite right. It's kind of blasting out. Oh, I see. If I step out, you're going to get a better view of it because it's not going to focus on me. So this is a painting I did again about 5 weeks ago when we got a good snowfall. And it's really just locally over by the Costco on Lawrence Station Road. It's a bit of land that, you know, those of us who live here in New Jersey, in central New Jersey, we certainly see a lot of these sort of raggedy forest lands by the side of the road, and they're very nondescript. There's not a whole lot of drama going on, but I'm really perennially drawn to them because I find these very quiet little dramas being played out. And in fact, I had been interested, I saw and was interested in these little vernal pools and ponds, and a good bit of the work I've been doing that's not plein air has been focusing on standing water locally at the side of the road and in ditches and vernal pools and ponds and all of that. But in this case, what happened was there had been some little standing water ponds in this area off of Lawrence Station Road, just here in Lawrenceville area. And when the snow fell, it settled on that shallow water and turned this very strange color, sort of yellowy green. And so I made my work that next day to grab a canvas and, you know, pull my van to the side of the road as much off the road as possible. And there wasn't a whole lot of room, but I made it, set up my canvas. And in fact, I've got a live feed available to see the start of this painting. But what was interesting to me was this, you know, you don't see these dramas unless you stop and look for them. And so the light was absolutely beautiful. And although both of these slushy puddles seem to be the same color when you first looked at them. In fact, the overriding changing light through the morning rendered them different color because of the shadows that were being cast and things like that. So there wasn't one moment where both of these puddles looked that different, but the painting seemed to call for wanting to, it seemed it needed to have this grosser difference in color in order to convey some of that space and drama of light. And, you know, our gray green woods here that look like nothing is just something that I'm pulled to. So this one is called Snow on Forest Ponds. These are not big forests. These are not dense forests. There's a train just beyond that I chose not to paint.
There's a question for clarification on your medium. So what kind of paint do you use?
I use golden acrylic paints. I was trained in oil paint, and you know, I like oil paint, but I don't love it. And what I do love is being able to paint quickly. And I'm going to get out here of the scene again so you can see this painting better. And I'm actually going to come in a little closer. You can see some of that detail and nuance. The acrylic paint allows me to work quickly, to throw paint on top of paint and make changes. It also, very quickly, it also has a kind of a translucency to it that I like. And I'm getting better and better at understanding it, how to utilize that. Now and then I teach, and it's not so much teaching how to paint as coaching different approaches. But often my students who work in oils have never worked with acrylic and find that it's at least initially liberating. So I'm always glad to introduce people to acrylics. A lot of people at first assume these are oils, and I suppose that has something to do with sort of this looseness to my approach and my smacking down paint and leaving it lie without getting too tight. I think acrylic at least historically in recent history, last 50, 60 years, it got a bad rap for being used for like sort of tight paintings, This is a little painting I did off of Carnegie Basin Road, just off of Route 1 below the canal. Again, I was looking at the little slushy ponds. I did 2 paintings that day, and this is the one that felt the more resolved of the 2. I like this painting a lot. So you can see it's really just not being fussy about describing the snow. These are very quick brush strokes. This gray at the back is that sort of bluish gray that I was talking about that I often use as a ground. And so you're really looking at a painting that happened fairly quickly, and I'm using the ground as the shadows. I'm not painting in shadows. I'm just smacking down a light direction in this sort of off-white. There's no real white in here. It's more these yellows because of the light of the day.
As you travel to your next painting, I thought I'd have another question. Is there a landscape or a place you'd like to paint once we're free to move around again?
Oh, sure, but it really doesn't matter to me where that is. I can find something to paint wherever I am. And, I did travel quite a bit in 2019. I even had the good fortune to celebrate my 30th wedding anniversary with my husband by going to New Zealand. And I did a series of drawings while I was there. And drawing is a good part of what I do as well. And I encourage people to draw more than they think they should. It's just another way of note-taking, visual note-taking. And in that work, I slow myself down and considering the forms and my intent more than I do in painting. But what happens is that kind of consideration finds its way into the paintings through a certain kind of sureness about subject. When you learn what a thing is, then you can start to take liberties with it that feel more honest and true. And that's what I like to do. Good question. I don't know where I'm going to travel to next. But in this painting, which was during 2019 when I still could travel, I actually just went to the Turtleback Park in Lawrenceville off of Darrah Road. It's a lovely little park. There's nothing remarkable about it, except that it's quiet. And I found this piece of root that had been exposed because the water had eroded the riverbank. And so I set up really close to it and pretty much just about a foot away and looking down on it. It became the creation of a painting that sort of flips perspectives, which is also something I like to do. You don't know if this is an arch that's, leaning up towards, not leaning, but, soaring up towards the sky. But in fact, it's just parallel to the water. And I like a lot of things about it. I find it's lyrical and also lonely and lots of other things. But that's a plein air piece that I actually like very much. Finding some poetry in the things that are not so grand. And here's a painting I did in Maryland on the Potomac River. I'm going to step away again so you get a little bit of a richer view of that painting and its colors. And so what interested me in this is that, the Potomac River is used regularly by kayakers for training. And it's a very turbulent water system at the Great Falls National Park. And so this was very churning water, very turbulent. And within the riverbank, there was very still water. And the it's a one water system. They're connected to each other, but the one being very still was really interesting to me. Again, because I look to shallow water for a lot of inspiration for the other work that I do. So this is really a narrative. It's as much a landscape it's as much a narrative as it is a landscape about these sort of connections between turbulence and quiet. And I did that one out there at the Great Falls National Park on the it's like a platform over the water at that point. And then I brought it back to the studio and I did just a little bit of tweaking that needed to happen. And that's not often the case. Most of the time, the painting is what it is for being outside. And it's just rarely that I'll work on it again, just a little bit in the studio, as the painting needs to have some attention. So it can be the painting it needs to be. And that actually brings me to answering a question for those of you. It's another question I get often, which is, when do you know when to stop? And I say, well, the painting tells me. So I have to be pretty keen on listening to my paintings. Here's two little paintings next to each other, and this wraps it up. The one above is a painting. I did a series of 4 of the lotus ponds at the Grounds for Sculpture this past fall. And this is one of them. It's called Lotus and Seeds on Sky. So I was interested in, a way of describing the landscape through a perspective that's not generally used, so that I'm talking about the sky above, and I'm talking about the reflections of the trees above and things like that above, just as the reflections, and also bringing that sort of chunkier painting approach to a small canvas while being outside. And I really feel like I turned a corner last fall for being able to do that really well. So that's actually a lotus leaf that's in a state of decay, which also interests me. And then close by, there were water iris that had matured and were dropping their seeds. And so we have, this notion of decay and also new growth for the next year, all happening in the same space. And I really like that. And then down here, it was the last of the winter paintings I did this year. Went to a little vernal pool that I go to often on the Bear Swamp here in the Lawrenceville area. And it was a very small vernal pool, but it had ice rings, and I had noticed that coming back from somewhere. And so the next day I went back and I did 2 paintings that day while the ice was melting very rapidly. And so the painting changed quite a bit as I was building it, but again, a very fast painting because, and so I grabbed a small canvas knowing that that was the dynamic for the day, that I needed to capture it quickly. But these ice rings were just beautiful, and sort of a very abstract notion that I feel like I grabbed exactly the way I'd hoped to. And I'm going to swing around.
One more big question for you about your framing, the way that you frame your pieces. And I know that you do it yourself, so I thought you'd want to talk about it.
Sure. Well, thank you for noticing that. If I hadn't been a painter, I might well have been a woodworker. It's not that I know a whole lot about it, but I do build my own frames, and built all of these little shadow box frames. I use cherry lath, and I use some pine that gets glued to the back of it. And, I use hand tools. It's a very small group of tools that I use for building them, but it's a very simple assembly. And I take pride in doing a good job of it. And it's just a way of bringing some continuity through the entire presentation, that they're all framed in cherry that's 2.5 inches wide, regardless of the thickness of the canvas. It sort of takes some attention away from what the substrate might be and keeps the attention on the subject matter. So how are we doing with time, Susan? We're going to be able to do our little tete-a-tete next.
We have a couple minutes. We're like 4 minutes to 8, but we still have 35 people here. So I don't think anyone will super mind if we go a few over, right?
Oh, well, that's great. Okay.
So in the questions, we've gotten a couple questions that are kind of to the both of us. So
oh, great.
One of them is talking about how different our paintings are from each other. And there are different approaches. Mine are all done in the studio. These pieces of yours are all done plein air, different visual results, abstract to very realistic. So how do we feel about the pairing and that kind of a thing?
That's a good question. Yeah. You know, what I think is that when you have two groups, when you have these two groups or any two things brought together purposefully, and you're not sure as a viewer why that is, I think it's an opportunity to ask yourself, you know, to find the answer for yourself. And so it's an inquiry, right? So it wasn't actually as evident to me immediately, other than water, which seemed like, well, okay. But beyond that, the nuanced connections between our work became evident as I looked at your work more, as I became more familiar with it and more familiar with your process. And so, for instance, although waves have nothing whatsoever to do with, I mean, your work in the studio of waves would seem to have nothing to do with my work outside that includes trees and vernal pools. In fact, there are connections because I was working on shorelines. So you can find a connection there. Your oceans exists up against shorelines. And, you know, you're looking at, you know, the show title being Texture of Water, you know, the slush ponds in my forests are water. And in fact, somebody was telling me, one of the instructors here was telling me that she had seen a kid come in and ask this very same question, like, what's the connection here? And the kid realized without too much time, the connection was water, even though the paintings of snow didn't seem evidently to be about water.
It's just water in a different state.
Exactly.
Yeah, and we want to say that the two of us discussed the title. We had all these different options, and textured waters just seemed like the exact right thing because we were both exploring in our own ways. Like I'm trying to capture water at all of its different stages, and the same with you, especially that eddies one with here's my turbulent with right next to this very still, and understanding them and the relationships between them. So even though we're approaching things very differently, it's still about that grasping, and that's the interest, that's the fascination with water, is how different it can be from moment to moment, but also state to state.
Right, and I think that, you know, even when what I've learned is that when you approach a thing as an artist that just simply interests you, it's really over a course of time and with hindsight that you begin to understand the more sort of the psychological reasons why, you know. So your work is oceans, but it's more than that. It's ocean surfaces, but it's more than that. You know, the fact that you chose, you know, to do the surfaces, but not really big breaking waves, you know?
Yeah, for me, it's something about, and I see, like I was explaining before, my interest is the water, not so much the rocks, not so much the other things. And so images of ocean waves were my clearest way to get just water. Because with lakes, sometimes the waves are tinier and there's trees and rocks, and it's not that I can't paint them, it's just that that's not what I'm studying, that's not what I'm focusing on. So that's why I gravitate towards ocean, while when I do my plein air, my little travel sketchbooks, I almost always am at lakes and I paint lakes, but it just seemed like the cleanest way to get to the core of water was having nothing else in the way.
Sure. Well, so this has been really, really fun to do the show with you. We do have another week and a half that it's up. I think the last day is the 3rd. It's a Saturday. I'd like to make a plug for both of us that at the end of this film, we're going to have a little still of our Instagram. So you can do like a little screen capture. Our audience can do a screen capture to know how to follow you on Instagram and me on Instagram, and to how to find your website, and same for mine. And I'd like to do a little plug for an upcoming workshop. I do teach for the Arts Council of Princeton now and then. Just yesterday I had a workshop, a 6-hour intensive workshop it left us all exhausted. It was a lot of fun. But my next one is going to be in June. It's a 2-day event where it's called Field Studies, where it mirrors what I do in my work, where I go out into nature and I take a very small kit to draw, and I just do careful little drawings that are lovely and precious. And then I bring them back to the studio, which brings us to the second part of that workshop, which is a full day in the studio doing interpretive work based on those sketches. And so that's going to be really fun. I look forward to that group of students.
Sounds so cool.
Maybe you'll join us, Sue.
Maybe. When is it?
It's in June. Two
Cool.
different weekends. Yeah.
Great. I just
Coming up
might.
soon.
I also want to plug, I have a workshop too. It's the first one that I've ever done. So who knows how good it's going to be. I think it's going to be great. And it's actually in April 16th. So it's a bit sooner, but, gonna do a quick little tutorial on like basic waves, but also, I'm going to, cause I do things in stages. So it'll be like, while this is drying, here are some looser ways you can paint things quickly. So, and I'll also talk a lot about my process, my big process and stuff like that. So lots of exciting things happening at the Arts Council.
Absolutely. I'm glad to be part of it. I've been on the periphery of the Arts Council for a long time and been involved now and then as well, but it's really fun to be invited to be part of it in a bigger way. I also want to encourage people to reach out to me. I'm a full-time artist, and you are too.
I am now.
You know, and encourage people to make purchases and help us along. I have a studio at the Grounds for Sculpture, and so if you want to see my studio work, please reach out to me or to the Arts Council, and they can put you in touch with me. And thank you so much, Maria. I'm going to hand you back to Maria, who's going to close it up. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. Thank you, Sue. And here you go.
Hooray!
So thank you everyone for tuning in. I think that was such an excellent show. And do come and see the show. As Léni said, it is up until April 3rd. I'm gonna put that screen up so that you guys can see how to contact them. And we have a lot to offer in the next coming months. The next show will be up on April 10th, and that's going to be a show curated by Maria de Los Angeles called A Voice to Be Heard, another really good show. So thank you and good night, everybody.
Hi, Maria, did you ask us a question?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay. Sorry, we were congratulating each other.